whenever I try to make an Instagram reel, I freeze completely, and I'm unable to access my creative side, I suppose. And I'm unable to access a personality of mine that would let me talk about things in a manner that feels confident, not just feels confident on the inside, but feels like I'm doing something good. So right now, what I'm trying to do right now is to have a conversation with you in front of the camera. So I've set up a camera and I'm recording this session between me and you being ChatGPT, by the way, and I want to see what comes up. I want to see what comes out, and I'm going to post this on YouTube. Um, right now, I think my aim is to become so proficient at being in front of the camera that it almost feels second nature to me. So I think I'd like to focus on the things that are really holding me back from being in front of the camera. ChatGPT says, yeah, actually think this is a fantastic experiment because you're removing the demand to perform. You're not trying to manufacture an Instagram personality, you're simply having a conversation and letting the personality emerge. And maybe proficiency in front of the camera isn't primarily about becoming more confident, it's about becoming less self-conscious while being observed. Your attention can then gradually move from how am I coming across towards what am I actually thinking and feeling right now. So let's keep this very simple tonight. No strategy, no optimization, no career planning. You're sitting in front of the camera right now. What is happening inside you in this exact moment as you realize you're actually recording this? Now, there's a fair bit of anxiety about my future, I suppose, because I've chosen the creative path, and I don't want to go back to slogging in institutions again. And so, I'm coming from a place of being told what I need to do in order to sustain a living. And none of it worked, obviously, because, the time that I grew up in, which was, I was in college from 2016 to 2021. Um, During that time, everything changed so rapidly with respect to technology and not just technology, but even in terms of the hiring structures that companies promoted. And so, because of that, I was left in a wake that didn't really cater to brains as much as it did to like just the brunt of trying to send out like 1,000 applications just to get one opportunity at a particular firm or company or organization, and I didn't really want to fall into that. So here I am. I'm trying to follow my dreams and whatnot. So ChatGPT says, yeah, I hear something underneath all of that. It doesn't sound like you're simply anxious about money. It sounds like you're afraid that choosing creativity might eventually force you back into a life where someone else gets to define what your effort is for. And after everything you've experienced with institutions, that possibility carries a lot of weight. But notice what you're doing right now. You're already practicing the thing you're afraid you won't be able to do. You're sitting here thinking aloud, letting yourself be seen without knowing where the conversation is going. You don't need to solve your future tonight. So when you imagine not having to return to that institutional life, what becomes possible for you? I think the number one thing is that there's a lot of censorship going on in institutions. You can't say this, you can't dress like that, you have to behave in a very specific, particular way. I mean, of course, decorum is something that definitely needs to be maintained and whatnot, but I think institutions, kick it up a notch higher because, they're always about, not just maintaining decorum, but they're all about maintaining personalities. I think it's quite, institutions quietly micromanage all of their personnel in a way that I just don't appreciate, and that I couldn't respect, that I would feel extremely shitty about if I were to sort of subject myself to that kind of an experience, and I don't want to do that. And so what becomes possible for me is I don't know yet, because I think because I've been conditioned to be in those kinds of environments, I think my body, my nervous system itself is sort of clinging onto those guide rails and not letting go because it's afraid of what might come if I were to fall off of the highway. And Yeah, yeah, and I would very much like to change that. ChatGPT says that metaphor is really interesting. The guide rails. Maybe the problem isn't that you don't know what freedom looks like, is that your nervous system hasn't had much experience with freedom that doesn't immediately become danger. And that's exactly why this camera experiment might matter. You're giving yourself tiny experiments of self-directed expression. I decide what to say, I decide how to say it, I don't need permission, I don't need to perform an approved personality. You don't have to rip the guide rails away. You can gradually discover through experience that there's actually road underneath them. And right now, you're already doing something pretty radical. You're speaking without knowing where you're going. What happens in your body when you realize I don't actually have to know where this conversation is going? Wow, that feels definitely feels liberating, to be honest, in a certain sense. And um, yeah, it definitely feels like I have the freedom of expression to sort of talk about the things that I genuinely want to talk about and put it on the internet so that people can find me and relate with me, and that I can find my people, and that opportunities can find me. But I'm terribly unsure about as to what those opportunities might be. And so that sort of tries to box me into another cage again, sort of to sort of get me to commit myself to a particular path, even if the path is of my choosing. And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm also thinking that it's okay to be unsure of myself and to misunderstand questions, to not have a complete sort of a grip on what I'm saying, because I think because I've been in those environments, I think I've become hyper vigilant of the words that I say, because those environments train you to be so obedient and loyal to a certain type of personality that I just don't want anymore. I want to be able to speak spontaneously and freely, and in a way that is unbridled of expectations. So yeah, unbridled. So ChatGPT says unbridled of expectations feels like the heart of what you're describing, and I think there's a beautiful irony here. You're worried that not knowing what opportunities will come from this will become another cage, but perhaps not knowing is precisely what keeps this from becoming another institution. You don't have to turn your expression into a 5-year plan. You can let people discover you before you know exactly what they're discovering you for. Oh, yeah. You can let people discover you before you know exactly what they're discovering you for. Yeah, that's exactly it. And you're also practicing something really important right now, saying something, realizing halfway through that you don't quite mean it that way, correcting yourself, wondering a little, and nothing catastrophic happens. Maybe that's a part of becoming an artist, learning that your first sentence doesn't have to be perfect. So, what would you say right now if you genuinely stopped caring whether you sounded intelligent? I don't know, to be honest. The urge to sound intelligent and to contribute something of value to the world is pretty seductive in its own right, and it's not right, to be honest. I mean, it's coming from years of being conditioned to constantly just be productive, and I don't want to be that. So I think if I genuinely stopped caring whether I sounded intelligent, I would, you know, that would definitely feel freeing and liberating, and I don't know what I would talk about. I think I would try to express myself in more than one particular way, I suppose. The accent, changing my accent, that's a pretty good place to start, I suppose, and sort of enacting various types of things. And this sort of brings me back to the multi-potential, multi-talented type of thing, where I've got a gazillion different interests, but I don't know where to sort of utilize those. And I think I could use YouTube to sort of do exactly that, to be able to express my multiple distinct interests, and that will hopefully bring in opportunities from God knows where. And I think I'd like to do that instead of just sticking to, okay, I'm going to choose a particular lane and I'm going to just stick to it like a horse with blinders on. And, I'm going to restrict myself from doing anything that is creatively alive, and that will somehow secure my safety, because that's a place that I'm coming from. Because in the institutions that I went through, all that was emphasized was to not deviate from what was happening in the community. and it was all about sticking to what was already known, or maybe there was a bits of there are bits of innovation here and there scattered at points in time, but none of it was really alive. I would say creatively, and I think those environments were so emotionally dead. Like if you went there, it was like a soul death to experience the kind of the emotional persona of that atmosphere was just very suppressive, I would say, and and as if now, I think if I generally stopped caring whether I sounded intelligent, it would definitely seem subversive to me towards those institutions, and it would make me feel like I'm doing something wrong, which is it is actually making me feel like I'm doing something wrong. But I don't want to feel that way. I want to feel alive. And ChatGPT says, what does it say? And yes, and I think you've just touched something quite profound. Aliveness itself may currently register as disobedience. Yes, that's exactly it. If you've spent years in environments where being valuable meant being intelligent, productive, correct, disciplined, and appropriately behaved, and simply playing with an accent, wandering between interests, saying something half-formed, or making something with no obvious utility can feel almost morally wrong. It absolutely does. You've got it right on the point. But that's not necessarily evidence that you're doing something wrong. It may just be the old conditioning saying this isn't how people like us are supposed to behave. Yes. And maybe YouTube can become your little laboratory for discovering what happens when you don't obey that voice. So let me ask you this. If nobody could ever evaluate your videos for intelligence, usefulness, or career value, what would you generally want to play with? I have absolutely no clue. I don't think I've reached that kind of an enlightenment yet. And I think this would be a good place to stop the video.